So the folks at Blender have recently released the roadmap of things to expect in the coming versions of Blender, and this actually gives us a glimpse into potential big features that we will be seeing with releases like Blender 5.2 and the rest alongside Blender 6. Currently, if you simply go over to link in the description, it brings you right here where you can see the roadmap. And this actually highlights some ongoing projects, some potential projects that are on hold, some upcoming projects, and some completed ones. Most of these have been done for Blender 5.1, and we've got a ton of things coming to Blender 5.2. And for those who would like to know when Blender 5.2 will be released, this will be moving to beta on June the 3rd of 2026. And final release will be on July the 14th of 2026. So for those who would like to catch up, and possibly you'd like to see some of the cool features that are here, then you can come through and check this one. Of course, we're going to make a detailed video about this one just in case you'd like to follow up with it. And so, if we go back to the roadmap, there is a good number of things that are now here. In 5.1, we did see that the fills and holes, pretty cool stuff that they did. This is now available for Grease Pencil. At the same time, we also saw that the raycast node, which was pretty impressive, the initial implementation for ray queries was also added to 5.1. For Eevee as well, we did get the GPU shader compilation optimization, and this was really cool as this did cut the initial shader compilation time in half on some platforms. One good feature which we did see that is also getting a good update here has to do with the OpenXR, and this has to do with Vulkan. So in the previous release of Vulkan, there was no huge support for XR and VR, but 5.1 did improve the performance when using virtual reality with the Vulkan backend, and 5.2 seems to double down on virtual reality, and we're going to talk about that in a bit. Meanwhile, for those who work with Render Farm, the folks at Blender recently released Flamenco 3.9. And for those who have no idea, Flamenco is an open source render farm management system, and it is simply designed to coordinate distributed rendering jobs across multiple computers, make it pretty easy for both studios or individuals to manage heavy rendering workloads. And for the Blender Asset Tracer, this is a companion tool to Flamenco that focuses on tracking and packaging all the assets a .blend file will depend on, as it simply ensures that when you do send a job to a render farm, all of the texture caches, the linked libraries, and other external files are properly collected and referenced. And version 2 has been released, and this is more stable. At the same time, Flamenco 3.9 now also has that support for version 2, and other improvements alongside these has been added to it as well. 5.2 will be coming with the new bucket algorithm. We're also getting textured brushes. This is also a pretty cool tool as well, which will be coming with Blender 5.2 for Grease Pencil, and like we mentioned earlier, for VR, location scouting is even better, as this supports blocking camera vantage points while immersed in virtual reality. This is something that we need to test, and it looks pretty impressive. Eevee is also getting some enhancement right here, which includes the improved ray tracing ambient occlusion pipeline, as this fixes critical issues that makes ray tracing implementation more robust. So with 5.2, you possibly will be getting better renders when working with Eevee. Another cool thing that is coming with 5.2 has to do with the improved instancing, as they've implemented the draw module instancing optimization support for Eevee. So if you work with instances, when rendering them, this would now feel much more better. Cycles is not left out, as we're getting texture cache with cycles, so if you do work with high resolution textures, little memory, this is definitely going to come in handy. If we scroll all the way up and take a look at some ongoing projects, you will notice something pretty interesting. We'll talk about these ones, but most studios would require a project setup to make sure that everything exists in one place. Instead of relying heavily on using a tool like the Blender Asset Tracer, you can actually have all of your stuff stored up in one place when you do set up a project. And once you set up a project, it means that all the resources that you get to work with exist within that project. Pretty similar to what you have with tools like Cinema 4D and Maya. So once you save an image, the image gets saved to the project folder, and you can simply transfer that folder from one environment to another without losing any detail. So it means that once you have that stored up, you can use that in various places. And I believe both studios and indie artists will definitely find this particularly useful. Dynamic override is also another nice feature which is also coming. So this is a very simple and efficient way of overriding property values linked or local, and having just this tool will definitely save a lot of time when you work in a studio, or if a studio chooses to adopt Blender. It just makes sense that when you're working with a particular file, you can dynamically override certain stuff and get them working. And this brings us to the input output, which has to do with collection import. So collection importing is something that they're currently working on. So instead of linking a collection or simply just appending it, you can now bring in a whole collection from a different file altogether and have them work inside of Blender natively. And potentially this might mean that we might be having an import button that would allow you to import an entire collection as against just appending that collection to a new file. And speaking about collections and files, assets is looking pretty nice, as currently the folks at Blender are actively developing and adding support for online/remotely hosted assets. And I think there was a build for this one that a lot of people did test out. So what this does in a nutshell is, instead of downloading all of the asset packs that you get from the Blender's website, or maybe you purchase an asset pack and having all of them installed on your computer, or maybe you want to get asset from a particular website, instead of having all of them right inside of your computer, which might take a lot of memory, you can now reference the website and download them via Blender. And this is taking a cue from Blender's extension platform. So previously, if you did download Blender, you would have all of these extensions pre-installed, and these will definitely take space on your computer. But with the Blender extension platform, you can easily find the add-on that you want, and you can click on Get Add-on. Once you do that, you can drag and drop that add-on right inside of Blender. And that is how easy you can install it. And if you don't want to go that route, if you like to install an extension or a theme directly from Blender, if you go over to the Edit menu, click on Preference, go over to your extensions, you can search for the extension that you want, and you can install that extension. This takes a look at the Blender extension website and installs the add-on. And this idea is exactly what the folks at Blender are currently thinking about doing with assets. Of course, at this point, there is no direct repository where things will be saved, but if you do have access to platforms like Polyheavens and stuff, you can simply link them by adding their URL and having all of their files display right inside of your asset browser. And that is going to be super useful. Platforms like BlenderKit are already doing something like that via their add-on, making it easier for you to find stuff and download them right inside of Blender, instead of finding them from websites and doing multiple steps just to have them in Blender. And if online assets make their way to Blender, that will be pretty cool. And in the same vein, while we talk about the online asset and the extension platform, the folks at SuperHype have recently implemented the Blender extension compatibility for add-ons, which means you can now simply go ahead and download these Blender add-ons, and from your download/other page, you'll be able to drag your add-ons and drop them right inside of Blender, just like you could do with extensions. And most of your favorite add-ons are already hopping onto this. With AutoRig Pro having the Blender extension compatibility, Retopoflow is also having that as well, and we've got some other ones like Gravity Rope, Perspective Plotter, Batch Converter, and a couple of other cool ones. It would also be beautiful to see asset packs like the Interior Model Asset Pack that ships with over 15,000 3D assets get shipped as an online asset, because having all 15,000 assets on your computer might definitely take some space. Tools like Polygonic that has high quality 3D trees would also benefit from these, alongside brushes and other various assets that can be used right inside of Blender. And when we speak about stuff that you can get from SuperHype, the folks at SuperHype recently announced the Super Add-on Bundle, and this is a limited time bundle as they're currently celebrating 12 years of SuperHype and offering creators 22 products in this limited time bundle. And the add-ons include Kamikaze, Dynamic VFX, Lightmaster Pro, Palette Grid, which is really good. Then we've got the physical open waters for water simulation. We've also got the Concept Magic, which is really good for those who like to conceptualize their ideas. Procedural interiors are for those who are thinking about building quick interiors. Robot Designer is really cool if you're thinking about building cool robots. We've got the Text Pro, amazing for motion graphics. Material Plus is also another beautiful add-on if you're thinking about painting light. Light Painter is right here. Raw Renderer is pretty cool for those who are into color grading and effects. Then we've also got another light tool which is called Light Wrangler. These add-ons, we've actually talked about them on the channel. We have Faceit for those who are thinking about rigging their character faces and animating them easily inside of Blender. Camera Tracker is really cool, and version 5 looks pretty insane. We've also got iCity version 1.7 for those who are thinking about building procedural cities inside of Blender. This is really cool. For clothing, we've got Simply Clothed version 2, the Studio version, and of course we've also got the Vine Cut version 4.0. If you're into modeling, you can also go ahead and explore the Grid Modeler, and for animation we've got the Puppet Studio and Go Physics. And one more tool that we have here is Cell Fluid for fluid simulation. All of this comes with licensing, so from standard license all the way to individual license, studio-based license, and so much more. So if you like to grab any of these, then links to this will be in the description, so do well to check it out. And back here within the roadmap of stuff happening in Blender, LoopTools is being ported to Blender. LoopTools originally exists as a standalone add-on, which is basically like an extension that you get to work with, but the idea here is this is going to be ported to Blender and would possibly be part of the modeling tools that we will be getting natively in Blender. Now, for those who haven't tried out LoopTools previously, I would definitely encourage that you go ahead and get it. It's free, it's right here on the extension platform, and you can easily use this to do some pretty cool modeling. I would love to see a situation where this does not just exist as a tool, but under the hood, this gets to speak with geometry nodes, potentially moving the LoopTools from a modular tool to a procedural tool like we have with Houdini. And while we speak about proceduralism, let's talk about the hair dynamics. So, hair dynamics seems to be a thing that will be coming as part of the nodes and physics feature in a subsequent release of Blender. And I believe this might be shipping with a variant of Blender 5, because sometime last year during the Blender conference, they did tease the physics nodes, and part of the physics node gets to do with rigid body, soft body, hair, and also cloth. And this makes sense because with all of these in mind and currently in active development, it simply means that not long now we might be seeing some of these tools and possibly be able to work with them to create amazing looking stuff. Of course, the new curve hair has actually helped a lot of creators make beautiful hair and also create amazing hair for their characters. And with the high quality hair dynamic modifier coming to Blender, this simply promises a lot, and I believe creature and character artists would have fun playing with this one. Another cool addition to the ongoing project includes the OpenPBR support. So the folks at Blender have decided to add support for the OpenPBR Uber material, and this will be an alternative to the current principal BSDF material, as OpenPBR is a standardized material model that is fully supported by multiple renderers and almost every industry standard DCC software. And Blender implementing OpenPBR simply facilitates a lot of things, as it makes sense that once you create stuff inside of Blender, you get it textured and surfaced. Once you open this in a different DCC tool, you will be able to retain the same texture and material qualities that you've actually done in Blender. And if you work in a studio where you have multiple DCC tools that have already adopted this is a wonderful addition. So it makes it easy for you to ship your stuff from Blender to Unreal Engine, Blender to Maya, Blender to 3D Studio Max, and so on. And by default, OpenPBR is a sub-project of Material X. And of course, for those who like to read up on the OpenPBR, you can simply head over to their GitHub where you can read more about them. And you can actually go ahead and see some of the resources that includes the Material X web viewer, the OpenPBR viewer, the Adobe OpenPBR BSDF, and of course, the hashtag OpenPBR, which is a public Slack channel for discussion that has been hosted by the folks at the Academic Software Foundation. And for those who like to read up on Material X, of course, you can simply come through and read up on Material X. And if you're looking for free materials, of course, there's a ton of Material X's materials that you can get for free. The folks at AMD have put together a Material X library which comes with a ton of things. If you're looking for backs, brick wall, ground, fabrics, marble, metal, paints, plastic, plasters, these are right here. And you can simply just click on any of them and download them and start using them. Some other interesting stuff that are currently in development includes the improvement of the Raycast node, which was released with Blender 5.1. We've also got the video sequencer compositor modifier, and like we all know within the video sequencer editor, the compositor modifier was released with Blender 5.0, and now they're currently looking at better ways of making the compositor to work with the video sequencer editor. And speaking about the video sequencer editor, Ripple Edit is something that we did see with Blender 5.1. And currently, they're looking at expanding the Ripple editing tools in Blender's video sequencer as well. So it's not like these two features have not been existing, but they're currently looking at ways to make them better. And still within the video sequencer editor, we're getting the new media management. Of course, this is still in design, but hopefully this would make a lot of sense later down the line, because what this would help us do is to be able to organize files as opposed to what we currently have now. So with these, you just don't know where things are, and you possibly will not be able to search for things easily compared to what you have with Resolve and Premiere Pro. So the media bin or the media management tool will definitely help anyone working with video sequence editor to have things a bit more organized. One of the longest projects that's been going on in Blender has to do with texturing, and right now texture layers, painting, and baking seems to be in active development. The first time we did hear about this happened when the folks at Blender talk about the layered texture design, and this was part of the strategic targets for 2022. Now, when this was announced, the texture data block, the texture layers, and how they would work was explained, as this would have to do with layer stacks, and various layers inside those stacks would have parameters that would potentially be linked to nodes. And of course, within this node, they did talk about baking, how baking gets to work, material, baked images, and also assets. and things seems to be the same, because if you simply go over to where the layer texture and baking design gets to be discussed, things are holding up as expected. So in principle, this is how things would look like, from a simple principal BSDF to an individual image texture node, all the way to having things become a bit more complex with effect, mask, and various texturing and painting assets. Now the cool thing with this is you still have access to doing your typical modular texturing while also having access to playing with the nodes and tweaking things to get a much more finer and nicer looking result. And the end goal is to improve material and texture authoring right inside of Blender. And I'm super excited to see this one come to life. And something that we possibly would not be able to get or test out anytime soon are layered actions. And layered actions seems to be bringing animation layers to Blender. Of course, we did see the first tease with animation slot, which was released sometime, I believe, with Blender 5. And this sort of looked good at that time. So the idea for animation layers is for creators to layer various actions on their animation. Currently, the only way you can do this with Blender is by simply using a tool called Animation Layers, which you can get from Superhive. Other than that, this is something that we don't have. We did see a tease of Baklava, and that did sell an idea of what will potentially be coming to Blender as animation layers, but up until now, we haven't really seen any major updates to that. And right now, the folks at Blender are saying this is currently going to be on hold. And now that we speak about animation layers, it will also make sense to see a sculpting layer in Blender. And that is something that we currently also don't have. Again, these things are only being provided based off add-ons. So if you like to work based off add-ons and do your sculpt layering or your animation layering, there are add-ons that you can actually go ahead and check out. Another thing worth celebrating is the fact that Blender will be shipping to Android very soon. We did mention that Blender for Android is coming, and we did a full video about that one. When the folks at Blender did tease beyond keyboard and mouse, they did mention that Blender was coming to iPad. As the original idea was Blender will port to iPad and subsequently it will be ported to Android. But I think things actually took a different turn as we're getting Blender for Android first before we get Blender for iPad. Potentially, we might be seeing Blender come over to VR as we're beginning to see more updates of features coming to Blender for VR. And currently, the folks at Pico seem to be supporting Blender in that regards. On the other hand, Wacom seems to be supporting Blender as well. And I think this is heavily influencing the fact that we will be having Blender for Android pretty soon, as Wacom does have their moving pad, and with their support, this means that if you do own a moving pad which is heavily powered by Android, if Blender gets to be ported to Android, you will be able to use your Wacom pen alongside your Wacom moving pad seamlessly. And this particular project seems to be handled by the folks at Blender Lab. And this is the innovation space within the Blender project that was recently opened. And right here within the first two projects, you get to see that we have the touch and pen, which has to do with, Blender coming to iPad, Android and stuff. And then we've got the location scouting with VR and XR. Within the Blender Lab, there are also certain projects that are currently ongoing, which includes the clay pencil 2D to 3D animation, which kind of reminds me a lot about Keymesh. So just in case you know about Keymesh or you don't know about Keymesh, I'm going to link a couple of resources in the description so you can check it out. Then we've got some other stuff that has to do with volume rendering. This is also pretty impressive. We've got light transport, and this is also really good for those who are into heavy scenes. MCP Server is something that was recently released. We did talk about that one. This is in partnership with the folks at Anthropics, creators of Cloud, and that did get a couple of reactions within the community. And right here for USD authoring, they are currently looking for funding and stakeholders. So these are projects being handled by the folks at Blender Lab, while these are currently projects that is overall being handled by the folks at Blender that will potentially be shipping with Blender 5 or possibly Blender 6 pretty soon. And all of this is to ease how creators get to work and also improve performance. And speaking about performance, we do have development tools which has to do with the Tracy frame profiler support. And this in itself is really cool as it helps with evaluation of new feature performance and profiling of the overall Blender code base. And this is a bit technical for those who are into tools development and you like to test out the tool performance before they get deployed. And speaking about new features, some projects are currently set to upcoming and not yet here. And this includes multi-stage compositing, which I think would have to do with being able to compose several things directly within your viewport, as this allows attaching post-processing effects directly to individual objects or material This would have to do with a lot of things. By the sample image here, you can see we have 3 different effects being added to 3 different objects in one scene, which is currently something that we are not able to do with Blender as it is. And right here, we also have pair sample compositing. And the idea for this particular one is to eliminate jagged edges and technical artifacts in post-processing. So these two are tied to Compositor and they're set to upcoming projects that have not yet started. So for anyone that is thinking about checking any of these, possibly you'd like to get a much more in-depth idea of each of these ongoing projects or projects that have been done that will be shipping with Blender, then links to all of this will be in the description, so do well to check them out. And of course, if you'd like to check out some of the add-ons that we've talked about, some of the resources that we've talked about, links to all of those will still be in the description, so do well to see them for yourself. Tell me what you guys think about this one in the comment section, and until I see you guys in the next one, peace.